RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site. You are listening to Warp and Woof Radio, Comenius Institute-sponsored show with your host, Dr. Mark Eckel, and your man in the little chair, Harold H.B. Bell. Each and every Wednesday, connecting wisdom and knowledge and trying to make some sense out of this crazy world we live in. Dr. Mark, how are you today, my brother?
Doing really good. Just got in from Pennsylvania last night, speaking out there in Pittsburgh, and a big hidey-ho to folks on the western side of Pennsylvania.
Absolutely, and I'm sure you dropped some wisdom and knowledge on them last night. Well, speaking of wisdom and knowledge today, we have the 2014 Teacher of the Year, Mr. Steve Perkins, who will be in studio today, and it will be interesting because, as you know, Mark, I don't know if you know this, yesterday I just posted education and work-ready programs for the Town Hall Forum. That we host every last Tuesday of the month, and it was just intriguing when I saw that we had the Teacher of the Year, because part of what the dialogue will be is our education system preparing our people to go into the workplace. And
there you go.
It's a valid question, a good question.
It is that.
So what we're going to do is we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to introduce Comenius Institute, and Steve will be in right about 10:30.
About 10:30.
So we're going to set this up for you and get some ideas, since you are a professor and you're back in school. We want to know, is all of this relative to what takes place after you get your diploma, after you get your degree. So we're going to be right back. You're listening to Warp and Woof Radio on the Cool Groove site at Radio Next. You're listening to RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site. Dr. Mark Eckel, Harold H.B. Bell, Warp and Woof Radio. And if you have tuned in, you know what we do. Really try to just combine the wisdom and the knowledge. And if you don't know the difference, check out Proverbs. And,
That's it. That's it.
And then we'll help you. And the Comenius Institute specifically takes its root from Proverbs and how we want to address the young people leaving home for the first time specifically. Mark, tell them a little bit about Comenius and how they can be a part of this.
Sure.
We've been seeing a lot of things going on with our young people when they go away for the first time, and they are really prey.
Yeah.
They are prey to the predators out here, and we have to have a sounding board. We have to have a safe haven.
That's right.
Places where they can go to get some answers when they're not around their parents. So
Comenius actually provides a bridge between high school and college for Christian young people coming out of high school, so that they can actually have a mentor of sorts, somebody who listens to their academic intellectual questions. And so I field those kinds of questions, not only one-on-one, but also on lunchtime meetings that we have during each particular semester. And upcoming, we have a brand new website rollout coming out in the next few weeks. We're looking forward to that, so that we can actually connect with people, not just on the campus of IUPUI, but around the world. Folks who have questions, wherever they might be, about the kinds of things that they're hearing on campuses. So this is actually being designed by folks who are working on behalf of Comenius. And I'll just give a shout out here to patrons, to potential patrons to Comenius. We would love to pay for this new website. With new patronage, it costs about $2,500 thereabouts to create a brand new website. We're looking forward to having that up and running really quick, but having folks come behind us throughout the year is a real valuable piece for all of us. And, of course, we're grateful for all of our board members. We think about Janelle Williams, for instance, or Matt Beauchamp over in Zionsville, or Elizabeth Meyer down in Greenwood area. And then, of course, there is the illustrious H.B. Bell sitting right next to me.
Oh, shucks. No, man, I can say that it's been truly an honor to partner with Comenius and lend any kind of expertise, awareness that we can to make sure that this avenue stays open. The reality is this is the new way to communicate.
Right.
Regardless of how we feel about it, we will have to reach our young people through the the tools of today.
You know, you have provided for us here a tremendous platform to communicate and to disseminate not simply the wisdom and the knowledge, but honestly to connect us with other people here in the community in Indianapolis. And let me just talk just a moment about one of the taglines that we have for Comenius, and that is based on Titus chapter 3, 1, 8, and 14, where we see the command over and over again to do good. And so what we do here on the radio show every single week is we bring in folks from around Indianapolis who are doing good in the community. And it doesn't matter if you're doing like the Carsons are doing, barbecue and fast cars. Doesn't matter if you're the 10-Point Coalition, Pastors Ellis and Harrison. It doesn't matter if you're like a Steve Perkins, who's coming in here today, Teacher of the Year from North Central High School here in Indianapolis.
Woof, woof.
Yeah. The old graduates getting anxious over here.
I'm coming up on 40 years,
That's
man. We're
it.
doing 40 years this summer.
So all of these things are really very positive and good for us. And so this is what Comenius does. One of the avenues is this radio show, which we're really grateful for because it connects us with the community throughout Indy.
Well, what we want to do today, too, Mark, when Steve comes in, is we're talking education, and we talk about it often about
Yes.
the 21st century educational model, where it lies on what we were taught. And I was thinking when I was riding in, thinking about the subject matter for today, and all I could think is like when we were younger, the garden had so many less seeds to kind of, you had to pollinate and had to nurture and had to grow.
Yeah.
And now the young people today, the garden is so polluted. The garden is so
Yes.
cluttered
Right.
with so much that we haven't changed the way we farm, I don't
Right.
think.
Here's
trying to get the results from the crop we plant.
No, I agree. Here's just one example of this. My son-in-law, Sam, you remember Sam? He was on the program
absolutely.
here. Sam is just telling me about a brand new program that some seminaries are putting together. That there are 3 different seminaries, and they're partnering with a fellowship of evangelical churches in North Central Ohio, so that pastors in the area don't have to go any place to do education. They can do it right at home through platforms such as this. And it's a marvelous opportunity. But here's the thing, HB, and this is the thing that you and I love, is that we're looking for partners. We're looking for other folks who want innovation. We want 21st century, 2017 into the future. We're not looking to replay and redo the old style of whatever it might be, but we also believe in the great soil of wisdom and knowledge that comes out of Proverbs, out of the transcendent truth that we find within Scripture. And this is going to be the basis then for what we do. But we're also looking for that innovation, that change that we know that needs to come in the future.
And for the listener who might not know what we're speaking of, right now, for instance, IPS is talking about closing 3 of the high schools. I think it's 7 high schools here in the metropolitan area. And the schools are actually so undermanned for what they were built for. There is no way, budget-wise, that they can keep this alive. I think instead of the murmuring, why don't we think of solutions? We've got all these empty buildings. We've got all this new technology out here. School the way we knew it, getting on a bus, riding 30 miles away from home or whatever. As you just mentioned, when you can educate, if you had a local facility 2 blocks from the home of a young person and had the computer set up and then had an on-site instructor and then had a master teacher trying to give real-world knowledge today on what takes place in the world today, that's kind of like the model we have to start thinking about, because we are teaching curriculum that when these students get out and go into the real world has no relevance. It has no attachment to what they're going to be doing in this real world. And I was teasing earlier and telling you about the school year itself. We're setting kids up for 180 days a year to go to school. First time they go get a real job, they get 1 week of vacation. That's a bit hard to digest when all your life, all you've ever done is be obligated to do something half the year.
Isn't that the truth? I keep talking to folks. In fact, I was just doing this the last 2 days in Pittsburgh when I was there, talking to folks about the practicum idea of education. That is a hands-on understanding of how do I use the information, knowledge, and content that I've been given to actually practice it in real life and real time. So Steve Perkins, who's coming in today, he's a board member at the Master's Study, where I teach actually. And one of the things that I do is I teach a course called Gothic Horror Literature, Dracula, Frankenstein, and such. And I have practicums every fall for my students. So they design really cool things that's hands-on learning, and I think that's really important in the direction that we need to go, while at the same time understanding, like I just mentioned a moment ago, that the soil from which these ideas grow needs to come out of a biblical framework, Steve and you and I are going to be talking about the liberal arts today and the necessity of some solid foundations of thinking going into the learning. So we need the change for the future, but we also need the greatness of the past.
As we always say, principles never change.
That's
it.
The
truth of principles never change. Fashion does, and we need to change fashion right now as far as how we're decorating our educational system, if that's a good analogy. But I just think that when we start having Teachers of the Year in the house, no, I'm just saying, how effective will their change be to the system that said you are a Teacher of the Year? Because you have to be innovative, else you couldn't even be nominated to be that.
Oh, man, when I was over at Steve's place, and he invited me over to his room, it was after exams were over and so on, and the halls were quiet. He and I talked for about 90 minutes, and you walk into this guy's classroom. I'm an old high school teacher, so I love this stuff. You walk into a high school teacher's room, and you start looking at what's on the walls. And man, he has got red and blue ribbons everywhere around. All these awards these kids have won in all of the Latin contests that they've been in, for instance. All of the pictures of the graduates. And I'm going to ask him about this morning, but he had these great pictures of some of the graduates that he was with here at North Central, just posted them this past week, and he calls them his jewels.
Oh,
and
yeah.
This is so important. Mm-hmm. So what we're teaching is hugely important, but the kind of relationship we have with students, man, is that massive.
Well, we said it so many times before, learning is a connected it's a connected subject matter, and if you can't find how these kids, that your jewels, so to speak, how they receive the information that you're trying to put in them, it's all for naught. And and I think you're hitting it on the head. We've been getting away with blanket education, where what we were teaching applied to 85% of the people, because 85% of the people were going to go on and just be laborers, which you needed to count, you needed to know how to read, basic instruction. But now, as you mentioned, man, this world is an open field for so many directions, that if we don't get in touch with who the jewels are individually, to know how to put this information in, and at the same time do it in a classroom manner.
And to see these kids come out of these classrooms, I mean, I'm reading some of the responses from these students from Steve's classes, and they are just over the top. And you can tell how much he pours into them, and how much respect they give him, and how much honor and love they give him, because they know they've got something in this class and in this teacher that is going to give them a foundation for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely. We're going to take a short break, but if you have some questions or have some input on what you think about education in the 21st century, as we mentioned, 2014 Teacher of the Year, Steve Perkins, will be in the house. Who better else to give information about what good education is and what good teaching is. And then we're going to explore some different questions that we're going to have, because we've got the cultural divide, we've got where kids go to school, we've got a lot of issues, and we start talking about education that is not under a blanket anymore. We'll be right back. You are listening to Warp and Woof Radio on the Cool Groove site.
And we are back, Warp and Woof Radio at RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. We are really pleased this morning to have 2014 Teacher of the Year, Steve Perkins, in the house with us today from North Central High School. And if you're on social media at all, make sure to look up our site, not only Steve's site, but mine and HB's, because you see all kinds of really cool pictures with Steve, some of his graduates and so on, Teacher of the Year, with all the other Teachers of the Year, President Obama back in 2014. Great stuff. So, Steve, thanks so much for spending some time today and coming in on the show.
Hey, Mark, HB, it's good to see you guys, and HB, good to connect with another Panther.
You already know, man. I'm so giddy, I don't know what to do with myself.
It's like old home weekend here. I got to tell everybody, listen.
But and part of this is what we're going to be speaking about today. You take pride when you went to an institution that helped prepare you for this real world out here. And back in 1977, in the era that I attended North Central, we took pride in our educational prowess. And, a lot of the people who graduated with me have gone on to do some great things, but honored that you're over there revitalizing what's going down in North Central.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, we're really glad you're here. Just to kind of set this all up and for everybody's benefit, kind of give us just a general background about yourself, your family, maybe a little bit about Teacher of the Year, maybe a little bit about North Central, go Panthers, whatever, man.
Wow. Wow, background. Yeah, I'm a native Hoosier from southern Indiana, New Albany, right across from Louisville, Kentucky, and my parents were educators. My mom had been a fourth grade teacher. My dad an elementary principal. He'd been a sixth grade teacher before that. And just early on, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. When you're a little kid, you go to the barber, you want to be a barber. The day you go to the dentist, you come home, you want to be a dentist. All that stuff. But I knew early on I wanted to be a teacher. That really connected for me. And got to high school and absolutely fell in love with Latin, of all things. And public high school, New Albany High School. And the teacher we had, Miss Rank was her name, and just a fantastic teacher. And she retired at the end of my junior year to marry her high school sweetheart. She'd never been married. And I thought, oh my goodness, lost this wonderful inspiration for me. And the lady who followed her has become a lifelong friend. Her name was Miss Halverson. She's then went on get married, and she's Marcine Farley now. Still teaches over in Illinois.
Oh, neat!
And she and I are in a lot of contact. And so my Latin kind of background became complete there in high school, and I knew that I wanted to teach Latin. There just was so much that you could do through the teaching of Latin, because it's not just the language. It's the culture, and along with that includes the philosophy, the history, the poetry, all that kind of good stuff, So go off to IU and intend on being a Latin teacher, and got a degree, and something even better, got a wife out of the deal. Met my wife in Latin class at IU, Melissa, and we then went off and started teaching Latin right away. And our first teaching was actually in Kansas City, Missouri, inner city. In fact, we were at Martin Luther King Jr. Latin Grammar Magnet Middle School.
So wow, there's a mouthful.
Talk about a mouthful of a name for a school, but back then it was part of Kansas City's Magnet program. And so we were at a Magnet Middle School whose focus was Latin grammar. And so we taught there for a couple of years. Loved that experience. We were at 42nd and Indiana streets in Kansas City, which was just inside the 43rd Street Crip Zone. So that was in the day when, especially the Crips and the Bloods in particular, were more operative, Latin Kings and some of these gangs, and there we are teaching Latin to middle school kids, and it was a fantastic experience. Left there, went to Texas, went to the University of Texas, got a master's in classics, taught there for a while. LBJ High School, and then moved back here in 1998, and I've been at North Central ever since.
Wow. That's a really great timeline. And when you stop to think about it, one of the things that you and I talked about when I came over to your classroom a couple weeks ago was the comment that you made kind of stuck with me, how happy and how pleased you were to have spent time in an inner city school. Kind of blossom that out a little bit more for us.
Oh, yeah.
What was the reason that you said that? What was the basis for thinking that teaching in an inner city school was important?
It taught me to teach. Simple as that. It taught me to teach. And like I say, I went to IU, and my degree is a Bachelor of Arts. My undergrad's Bachelor of Arts in Classical Studies, but also took all the education classes, and so certainly learned to teach to a degree, right? I mean, you've got your theory classes, you've got your field experience, you've got your student teaching. But it's not till you're on the ground.
That's right.
And you do it on Monday.
That's right.
And you got to come back on Tuesday.
Yep.
And you got to come back on Wednesday. And after the weekend, you got to come back on Monday again.
That's right.
That it really becomes real. And I think two things. I think both the inner city, but also teaching middle school was crucial. And I'll say why. But from going from there to the next step of teaching undergraduate at the University of Texas, as an assistant instructor, you want to talk about a jump, right? I'm in middle school to undergrad.
Yeah.
And I consistently got comments from the undergrad students at UT about how, hey, this guy is able to really make things relatable. This guy can break things down. I understand things from this guy. And I immediately realized, that was because my previous experience had been teaching middle school.
Sure.
if you can come down to the middle school level, right, if you can break it down at that level,
that's it.
Then it doesn't really matter whether you're teaching undergrads, teaching adults, whatever. You've got that ability to break things down. And so I think that's the key.
That's huge. And this issue of teaching in middle school, I always tell people, if you've taught middle school, there's a special place in heaven for junior high teachers.
Oh, my God.
Seriously. It really is. Plus the fact that you taught in the Crip Zone, plus you were teaching Latin in junior high, man. This is just phenomenal.
Well, I tell you, we just recently started an alumni group of my former students. And believe it or not, I've actually got a couple from those King days that go back that far. No, my wife's a genuine middle school teacher. When we were teaching there, that became obvious. A lot of middle school teachers, I think, they really want to teach high school. They really want to teach elementary. They got stuck at middle school, right? And my wife was very much a genuine middle school teacher. And what I've always said to people about that, she could go from tough as nails, exactly what they needed, to loving in like 0.5, half a second.
Say two
right?
words.
Boom, she's there. Me, I would get angry with misbehavior and I'd get stuck because really I was probably more geared for high school and that sort of thing. But like I say, being able to make things accessible, and one of my favorite quotes, I don't know if we mentioned this the other day when we were talking, but one of my favorite quotes on education, or essays on education, is from the French essayist Montaigne. And he's got this wonderful essay simply titled On Education. And he says, it's the mark of a strong and lofty soul that knows how to come down to a childish gait and guide it. And then he says, I walk more firmly and surely uphill than down. Right? I think most of us, it's easier actually to teach up, right? To teach the higher levels, right? That's where we're more comfortable, especially as adults. But to be able to come down to a child's gait,
right?
And really, where that's teaching, helping a little one learn to ride a bicycle, whatever it is, and that's a little bit tough.
Yeah,
that's a little bit tough on us.
Yeah,
but to be able to come and be able to do that, it really is. It's a matter of soul. It's a soulish issue, and certainly starting off in the lower grades develops that.
Yeah,
no question.
You had said something in our discussion about your students, but frankly, what I've learned about you since that time on social media, when you started posting some of the pictures of your recent North Central grads,
right,
and you referred to them as jewels. Okay, now you got to unpack that for us. Tell us why you call your students jewels.
So, the last few years, because I always go to North Central commencement, and it's a really neat commencement opportunity. The teachers are in their robes, and it's nicely done. In the last few years, I've done what everybody else has done. I've taken out my phone. I'm sitting there in my cap and gown, and I've got my phone out, and I'm snapping pictures of my students as they go through the line and get ready to cross the stage. And occasionally I'll get the attention of one of them. They'll kind of wave and kind of big eyes, and that kind of stuff. And I got a bunch of the pictures this year, and I got several of them with them before and after, and that kind of stuff. And a line came back to me from ancient Rome. And no surprise, I'm going to relate everything, I'm a classicist, everything relates to ancient Rome. And there were these two Romans well known to history, the Grack Eye Brothers. All right, and these guys were land reformers, and they were both killed, ultimately murdered by the patricians and such. But when they were young, their mother Cornelia had a woman over who was quite wealthy. And this woman was showing off her jewelry. Some of the finest jewels of the time, apparently. And this woman was going on and on and on and about it. And so the mother Cornelia manages to drag the conversation out until her two boys came home from school. And she called them over, and she says to the woman, "Haec sunt mea ornamenta." These are my jewels.
Yeah, I love it.
And I love that story, exactly. I love it because she knew obviously what was important. And I think as a teacher, we talk about the legal phrase, right? We operate in loco parentis, in the place of the parent. We've got legal responsibilities. Sometimes students don't realize that. From the time they leave their property in the morning to the time they return to their property in the afternoon, The school is responsible. So even in the interview, the walk there, across the sidewalk, whatever, the school is legally responsible. But I think it's more than that also, right? We operate in loco parentis because I've got the same pride as every parent and grandparent that was at Indiana Farmers Auditorium the other night. I'm going, yeah, because I've had these kids. And the fun thing, too, I think about a Latin teacher or any language teacher, choir teacher, band teacher, some of these where you have students for multiple years. I really think we've got the advantage.
Yes.
I feel sorry for my colleagues who only get to have kids 1 year.
Right.
Because if you get them to have them 3 years, 4 years, in my case sometimes even 5 years, because we let 8th graders start their language study at the high school, that's a lot of time to build a relationship. And so you get to know these kids, and you're going to love them.
Yeah, that's it.
Let me say this, and I agree wholeheartedly. In the programs that I am allowed to work in, I get to follow my students and have them around over numerous years. And I've had one that is getting ready to go into his senior year that I've had since the 5th grade, and he's now 6'5", and he comes in and dwarfs me now. But I mean, he is like my child. And then I had 3 seniors graduate this year: Ariana and of course Nicodemus over at North End. You know Nicodemus Montz. He actually hosts the show here at Radio Next. Nice. But no, just an excellent young man. And I agree that the relationship that you build with you take them on like your children, and you have the same concerns and responsibilities, and you give out the same wisdom that you would give your child. And that kind of leads me to the question I have. We're talking education, and if you just tuned in, we're talking to Steve Perkins, 2014 Teacher of the Year. There is a education side, then we have the teacher, and then we have the student, and it's almost like this combustible mix. Where is that line where teacher, student, that merge when you see it and you say, yeah, this is what I'm doing this for? And then what's missing in a lot of the educational practices now where we don't cultivate that? Because I'm witnessing a lot of teachers that just come and it seems like I'm here for this 8 or 9 hours, and then when I'm leaving and I'm coming back tomorrow. But the teachers that I watch that are successful have that same attitude.
No, yeah, those are 2 great questions. And I think you're going to get the teacher who sees it more as a job when you focus on it more as a job and focus on end results like test scores. In fact, we were talking during the break. I just posted something yesterday, blasting once again the insane focus on test scores, and that's absolute lunacy because you then treat. I said before, look, we've got this system of education where it comes out of the Industrial Revolution. You think about the organization of a high school. Think about the organization of high school, right? First period, there's your Latin. Boom, bell rings. Move down the line. Then there's your English. Bell rings. Boom, move down the line. There's social studies. Surely, the assembling of a child's mind has got to be different from the assembling of a Chevy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it can't be the same thing. That cannot be the same thing. But yeah, if you treat it that way, you're going to have teachers, you're going to have employees who treat it the same way. You're going to be focused on that kind of end result. That's nonsense. It's a human enterprise. There's few things that are more distinctly human than education. And you think about what we're doing right now, 3 men in a room, we're talking. It's human. That's what we do. And so I think for me, when I see that moment when, as you say, in that wonderfully combustible mix of teacher and student, of adult and child, but when that comes together and you have that aha moment, it's when it becomes something like this. When I'm talking with a student and I'm looking them in the eye and we're having a conversation as fellow human beings. Now, make no mistake, I know more than anybody in that room. And I darn well ought to, or why did you hire me? Exactly. Right? Obviously, that's also lunacy, to try to pretend that there's no difference in knowledge. Well, of course there's a difference in knowledge. I ought to be the expert in Latin. The algebra teacher ought to be the expert in algebra, or why did you hire that person? But that doesn't mean that you're better than. And just because you're an adult and they're a child, it doesn't mean that you're better than. Right? We're all children of God. And so I'm looking at this individual, and I'm saying, here's a fellow human being. Now, you may be multiple years younger than I am, but you've got something to say. And especially with teenagers, but not even just teenagers, even younger. We use, you think about a word that you would use in philosophy, an interlocutor, right? Somebody that you're having a philosophical conversation with. I've had wonderful conversations with teenage interlocutors who are able to think well and think deeply and think broadly, and to make a lick of difference, really, where they come from, again, maybe age, but I'm interacting with them as a fellow human being. So I think that when you're able to do that, that's absolutely why you keep coming back the next day.
Absolutely, man. Let's take a short break. And when we come back, what I want to do, Steve, is start talking about, you just mentioned the educational model. And I will say it candidly, it's broken. And we need to figure out what we're going to do as we take our young people into the 21st century, how we can prepare them for this real world. You are listening to Warp and Woof Radio on the Cool Groove site at Radio Next.
And we are back, Radio Next, at the Cool Groove site. You're listening to Warp and Woof Radio. We come to you every Wednesday morning from 10 until noon, and we are in the midst of a great interview with Steve Perkins, who was 2014 Teacher of the Year in Indiana. And we are discussing the next great
topic. Out of
North
Central High School.
Oh, yeah. Well, we got HB sitting over here, the North Central grad. Got to get his...
Give that some pub.
Yeah, man. 40th anniversary coming up for the man over here, so we got to give it some love. So here it is. We're talking about education generally. And HB, you wanted to talk about something that's really important to you concerning the model of education.
Absolutely, Mark. And we mentioned before that we will be doing the Town Hall Forum. And thanks to the Indiana Civil Rights Commission for allowing us each month to host this forum, and the Avondale Meadows Y. But the last Tuesday, we will be discussing education and work ready. One of the things about the educational model as I go into the schools that I'm witnessing now is we're not really preparing our young people using the educational model for what they're going to really be doing once they leave the school system. And I've said it before, and I get a lot of flack as parents. Well, what do you want us to do with our kids? Because I just think that we're setting our kids up for failure when they go to school for 12 years, like 180 days a year. First time they're out, if they're not going on to post-secondary education, first job they get is going to require them to be there everything except 1 week in vacations. Just right there, I think we're kind of like behind the times in what we're needing to do to prepare for work ready. Because most of these kids will be work ready once they get out of their senior year of high school. So what can we do to make the educational platform, the system of education, relate to the real life experience that I guess we should be doing in the educational model?
One thing, we should probably not be requiring so much education.
Uh-oh.
Preach, teach.
He stepped in it here. Here we go.
Just pulled a pin and threw the grenade. And Mark, we've got a mutual friend, Ron Brumbarger, who has started Apprentice University on that very notion that the unwritten commandment is thou shalt go to college. In fact, he's got that on the back of his business card, and the notion that everybody has to do that, when in fact, if you look at the whole notion of apprenticing down through the centuries, right? You apprentice as a blacksmith, as a wheelwright, as a carpenter, all these things. There was wonderful, good work to be done without that. And so do I think education is important? Obviously. I wouldn't be in this if I didn't. But there are different kinds of education, different ways to go about it. Obviously, I'm a Latin teacher. I think that having a knowledge of the classical world is important for really any citizen, especially any citizen of the West, because ours is a Greco-Roman heritage, like it or not. But for culture, for our architecture, law, you name it, our roots, our ancient roots, are Greco-Roman. So I think there's a reason to know that. At the same time, should everybody become a classicist? Of course not. That's ludicrous. And so I think having opportunities for students to, some are simply more hands-on, right? And so they have that. And obviously, HB over there at behind North Central, we've got the J. Everett Light Career Center.
Absolutely.
Which is tremendously important. And I've said to students before, I said, look, what's important? I said, when you get out, are you providing for your family? Are you making a decent wage? Are you contributing to your community and your society? Then hallelujah.
Success.
Right, there it is. There you go. There's success. Does that mean you don't have to be a CEO? You don't have to be at Silicon Valley? And yes, IT is hot right now, and it's going to be and getting hotter. Of course, that's part of who we are. But there are so many other things as well. And so partly I think it's exposing students to what those other things are, which is why having opportunities for them to shadow, apprentice, go to work with a parent or someone else. I know we've got those kinds of things. We've got there's some kind of a teaching program we've got, and a lot of schools have it, where they get to shadow a teacher and actually kind of explore that sort of thing. Well, some of those things are going to take you out of the classroom. Okay.
It's like real world. You know? I mean, let's do real world.
At some point. And we've got some friends, and the mom and dad, I think one's British and the other spouse is Scottish. And the mom was saying one time, she said, I don't understand why they go to school so much over here. And after they hit the teenage level, why are they in school so much? We don't go to school that much. And I said, yeah, well, that kind of was a good question. And part of the reason is because we don't know what to do with kids. All right? Part of it is we've got to warehouse them. You've got...
Didn't we just mention that? I told you a lot of... Steve, I was just telling Mark before you arrived that a lot of these schools, especially inner city schools, are pretty much just daycare centers.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, you think about it. You've got kids, say 6 through 18. All right? And for the majority of the daylight hours of the day, what do you do with them? No farm to work on. And there's no business, there's no whatever. So as a society, what do we do with them? Well, we put them in school. And so then what you get is you get two competing goals, and I think that they are at times irreconcilable. Control and education. Now, we were talking about the value of discipline. You got to have discipline, and that's absolutely right. But we're talking about lockdown control. And that level of control, I think, is incompatible with real education. We've got to have some freedom. Kids have got to be able, if you need to, say, again, go out, apprentice, maybe work a job, and come to school. We're losing that. Yeah. You know, there's a movie, it highlighted, again, true story, McFarland, USA. Came out a few years ago. Kevin Costner, he's the cross-country coach, goes out to California, and ends up at this school, and there's a bunch of Hispanic kids, and he realizes these guys are going out in the mornings. They're getting up, you want to talk about dark 30, right? They're getting up to go pick and then come to school. And he actually went out to do it with them one day and realized just how hard that was. But these guys are actually trying to integrate work and school. And are there ways to do that? You know, my wife, she got her master's in ed administration at what was then Southwest Texas State University down in San Marcos. And I got my master's at University of Texas. And she looked at UT. And even though UT's my alma mater, I'm going to say something a little bit against them. They were so much of the mindset, this is who we are, this is our program, this is when it starts, you will join us or not, whatever. Whereas Southwest Texas State, which has started off as a teacher college, said we recognize that teachers are going to be ending the school year at different times. They form cohorts. They've had ways to work with these professionals who are coming back for maybe their master's in administration or master's in curriculum or whatever. They found ways to work with them. They said, we recognize these are working professionals. Whereas UT said, here's what we offer, take it or don't.
Here's our brand.
Right?
Yeah, here's our brand.
And I'm going, I loved what Southwest Texas State did because for that particular program, because they said, here's people who are working. We need to work with them and find ways for that to happen. So, you know, how do we do that? Yeah, that's a great question, but I think we've got to find some way to do that and make that more accessible. And I know, like at North Central, we do have early release, and we do have some of those kinds of things that make some of that possible.
Now, one more question. The tool of technology today allows kids to not even have to really retain or aggressively research to learn. And I've found that, you know, I don't know in anything that you do, part of the sense of accomplishment is the reason why you pursue. Education to me now, I mean, if you can Google and find out the answer, and not have to really go dig and do some research. I think that when we start setting everything up on a test, we are losing so much identity of who this student is versus off what this test score is, that we're not even understanding who those jewels, as you mentioned, are. Pulling them down that little cylinder of here's what makes you successful. Right or wrong answers make you, and I think that's the biggest misnomer in the educational system now. We are losing sight of the individual gifts that some of these young people have that are way outside the educational parameter, and so, like you say, they're quitting, they're giving up, they're not engaged, and so more than anything is like, how do we get inspiration back into saying, okay, here's why I'm here, because it's going to lead me there. When you run the marathon, you start out knowing 26 miles is the marathon, but once you accomplish 5 miles, the next goal is, let me get to 7 miles, let me get to 10. And that's part of the human nature, I think. And we don't have any of that anymore. We don't have the desire to want to say, while I'm here, by the time I get to the 12th grade, that's why I'm here. And I remember, it was either going to college or, like you said, it was either getting a good job. There was something waiting at the end of that rainbow.
Right.
And I don't think that the flag that's waiting at the end of that rainbow looks good enough right now for these young people in this learning environment.
It doesn't look good enough in some instances, and I think in other instances there is this wonderful looking flag, but it's simply expected to be there. That I don't really necessarily have to do anything. Just basically, if I put in my time, then what I'm owed is the good life. Or I'm owed. The American dream is not that I have the opportunity to work, to achieve something, I can become whatever I want. The American dream is simply I'm owed this good life. And and I think it is a misnomer. I think we do bash on millennials a lot, and think that everybody has this entitled mentality. Now, there's a reason that a stereotype like that exists. Right? There's some reality to that. Certainly, that's not true for every millennial, right? That's not true for every teenager. But I do think for a lot. And we were talking about the cell phones and technology during the break. You've got more computing power in your pocket than NASA had when we were first sending vehicles off this planet. A few years ago, I was down at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center down in Huntsville, Alabama, which is home to Space Camp, and they were talking about that. They said there is more computing power in your phone than was in some of those vessels that we initially launched off the surface of this Earth. And you're going, oh my goodness. Well, you put that in the hand of a child, and suddenly it's like there was nothing needed to achieve this, right? I've got this incredibly powerful tool, which is really then for them just a gaming machine or access to text friends or whatever. But they've got that. They had to do nothing really to get that. It's just there. And so I think that feeds that expectation of, hey, there's going to be some wonderful prize at the end of the rainbow. And there's not the recognition that maybe I do have to work for that. And I think, that's one of the things I think maybe our athletes, sports is maybe one of the last places where you still really have that. And it's part and parcel. You will not play Friday night, right, if you didn't show up to practice, if you didn't go to conditioning. You're not going to make varsity if you didn't go through all this stuff and prove yourself. So, you still have that in some pockets. And that's why I think, sports are great. I think our music programs are great. And that's why you got to have those things as well. So the kids do make that connection between if I do this, then there's that. Right. It's a connection between this.
But and they're almost diluting that. I get so upset with these little league. Everybody gets a trophy. I am so mad about that, man. I'm telling you, when everybody gets a trophy just for participating, I think that we are building a mindset of all I have to do is just be there, and I should get something. My lady friend and I were talking just about that almost today, what we have to do. Even if she does work-ready programming, and today, if they make it 5 days in a row on time, they almost need a certificate to keep them inspired and happy because they need something. I know what you're saying, Steve, but truth be told, if you've never done 5 days in a row of anything of being on time, you need to recognize that person, no matter how shallow it seems to us, who being on time is part of the prerequisite.
I saw the billboard driving over here. Big billboard. It says, 2 absences a month equals less likely to graduate. Right? And I was thinking about that, right? So why does that billboard exist? Why did that billboard need to be put up? Well, you don't tell somebody something that they already know. All right, so you've got obviously students with attendance problems, and just what you were saying.
Absolutely, and I don't agree with it, but it's almost like, what are we going to? We're going to have to do something to get them inspired and enthused. And if they've never had recognition for doing anything, got to start someplace, I guess. I don't know. Got to start someplace.
There is that. This is a fascinating conversation. Maybe we need to take a break here soon, but what I'd like to do coming back in the next segment is to discuss this very issue of, okay, so yeah, we've got computers in our pockets that can send a man to the moon now, but the question is, so is there anything worth knowing? That is there any kind of knowledge base that is of necessity for every individual? So we talk about education, the importance of education. You're a Latin teacher. So is there something that we have to know? We're going to come back after this break. You're listening to RadioNext.tv at the Cool Group site. Woof and Woof Radio. We'll be right back. You're listening to RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. This is Warp and Woof Radio. We come to you every Wednesday morning from 10 until noon. And this week, we have Teacher of the Year from 2014, Steve Perkins, in the house with us. And just before we went on break, Steve, I was asking the question, as we were discussing the issues of technology and how much, all we have to do now is go to Google to figure out how to spell something, whatever. Is there anything left to learn? What is there to learn? Should we have some kind of content, some kind of foundational knowledge? Is there something that we should be teaching young people, considering the fact that they have a smartphone? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think so. And again, I think there's information that can easily and perhaps best be found on a smartphone. All right, who starred in thus and such movie? Who won the Super Bowl that particular year? Look it up. That's not necessarily something you need to have at your fingertips. You don't need to have that memorized unless you're just a trivia buff. But then core knowledge, things that you need to have not just memorized to learn for the test, but actually become a part of you and really shape who you are. The answer is, I think, absolutely yes. And I think for that, you look at the things that have stood the test of time. And you find it in the poetry of the world. You find it in the philosophy of the philosophies of the world, the grand histories, these narratives, right? These are the things that are now, at this point in the game, part of our shared collective humanity. The fact that it originated in Greece, the fact that it originated in China, or where, it doesn't make a bit of difference at this point in the game. That's shared human wealth. That's part of who we are as a human beings. So yeah, I think those are things that you do, and so you typically find that in the classical liberal arts. Right, that's the stuff that it's the history, it's the literature, it's the philosophy classes, and not for the sake of just being some esoteric individual who can hold forth in a coffee shop, but the person who really who's well-rounded, who has that broad sense that yes, as a character in a play by the Roman playwright Terence said, I'm a human being. Therefore, I find nothing that is human to be alien to me. All right, and so that then applies to everyone. So yeah, I think there is that kind of knowledge. It's there. It's accessible. It's not just to be memorized. It's not just to be looked up, but it's to be known and really like good food. You don't just scarf it down, right? You scarf down a burger from Burger King, but a good meal, you sit and savor it. And that's what that kind of knowledge is. It's something you savor. You savor it in community. Again, I've said this with you earlier, I think, on the show today, that education is a shared journey of discovery. Well, shared is a key word there.
Yes.
Right? So this isn't just something that I do with my smartphone while I'm waiting for my burger at Burger King, right? But it's something that I do in community with somebody else, and as we're doing right now, the conversations.
So you used a phrase just a moment ago about core knowledge shaping who we are. Okay, so we're talking about, is there any knowledge to know? We say, yes, there is. So what kinds of knowledge shape who we are? You've addressed the issues of poetry and narrative and so on. But let's talk about how do those things shape us? What is it that happens within us when knowledge meets our mindset, our disposition, meets our affective being, meets the things that you can't touch? We talk so often in education about cognitive and behavioral outcomes, but so little about affective outcomes with an A. So how do these things, poetry and narrative and so on, shape us?
Well, I think it happens through, again, this is going to sound maybe even hippy-dippy, but it happens through inspiration in life. Here's the thing. If whatever you're talking about, whatever the topic is or the issue is, if there isn't life in it, it's not going to shape anybody. It's just going to sit there as some factoid. Okay, good to know. But there's no life in it. But if there's life, where there's life, there's breath, and where there's breath, there's inspiration. And so again, and listen, we're using words that you're not going to find in the School of Education, and you're not going to find on any teacher evaluation system. More's the pity, because you're talking about something that is mystical.
Yes.
You're talking about something that is magical. Dare I say it? You're talking about something that is spiritual. And there it is. There's a great book by George Steiner called Lessons of the Masters, and he talks about this. There is something going on between teachers and students, and again, it is transcendent. And so now we're using all kinds of words, and this is what would blow the minds of I think evaluators and sadly some administrators and legislators, because you can't analyze this.
Right.
You can't check it off in boxes.
Right.
I will tell you right now, and yeah, I know this is going out on the air, and I'll go on record. One of the absolute stupidest things in education is demanding that a teacher write something on the board every day for some stupid objective. And evaluating the teacher based on that. Oh, you didn't have the objective written on the board. Who cares? Who honestly cares? There's not a kid in a classroom that's ever looked at that and gone, oh, hey, now I know what's going on. Are you kidding me? That is ridiculous. It is clipping the wings of teachers who could be flying like eagles.
Yes. But let's take that a step further and come back to something. I think that we were discussing this off air, and the question of why. So why, I tell people all the time, they've heard this on air so often, why is the most important question. Why tells us about reason, meaning, and purpose. So how does the why connect to, okay, I don't need the objective on the board, but I still need to know why I'm in the classroom and why I'm teaching what I'm teaching and why that kid should learn this stuff?
Well, the why is a great question, and I do think a teacher needs to have some idea of the why before entering the classroom.
There you go.
Now, that's going to develop and get more defined for the teacher as you stay with the profession and become a lifelong practitioner of that craft. But you do have to have some idea of why you are doing this.
Yes.
Because I want my summers off? That's an answer.
Yeah.
Because I want to give back to the high school I grew up in. That's an answer. So you have to have some sense of the why. I think a child at any level, really from high school down, is probably not going to come in with the why. They're not going to come in with that.
Right.
And that's okay. They don't need to have the why. They will look back and discover the why later,
right,
if it's been done right. And there, I think it's about, again, I'll come back to my phrase, the shared journey of discovery. I think it's about going along with that child. And so I'll use the word child now. So that takes in whether you're 6 years old or 18, right? So the gamut of kind of K-12. But you enter into that journey with the child. And so whether you're doing an experiment in the elementary school classroom with fizzy stuff coming out of empty Coke bottles, or you're exploring Frankenstein with a junior in high school, it's a shared journey, and they are drawing life from you as they see it in you. Because what a teacher is doing is not just teaching at somebody, right? But you are modeling it.
Yes.
You're embodying it.
Yes.
All right. So now we're going to throw another word that is going to just blow the minds of any evaluator. Teaching is incarnational.
Oh,
right?
Here we go.
You've got to incarnate what you're teaching. Right. You've got to inflesh it. You've got to bring it into to reality. So again, some kids sit there and read Shakespeare, look at some science problem, whatever, on their own, nothing there. But in the hands of a gifted pedagogue, right, someone who's a leader of children, who infleshes that, incarnates it, makes it real, and the teacher's eyes are sparkling, and it's in the demeanor. And we talked about the word disposition earlier. It's in the disposition of the teacher. The child is going to pick that up. Now, the child's not going to say, "This is why I enjoy this," right?
Yes.
The student's not going to understand the why. But later on, they're going to look back and say, "Yeah, and that's what I want for my child,"
Right.
when they become parents.
Yeah. I was sitting with a former student of mine just yesterday, actually, over lunch. My wife and I were in Pittsburgh. I was speaking over there. And I asked this young woman, what did she remember about all of the things that we did in high school classes? And like you said earlier that the thing that you benefit, or that you think that the students benefit most from, is that you're with them for a year, 2, 3 years. In my case, I was with them for 3 years. I had them sophomore, junior, and senior years. And what she said to me was, it was your teaching style, it was your methodology, but it was the inspiration that came out of that, so that she was enlivened in life. And so I love the concept of incarnational, of course. That gets us toward the theological aspect of what we're all about. So let's just kind of drop a couple words here, and if you wouldn't mind, just give us some definitions. Let's talk, first of all, about, since we're talking about theology, let's talk about what does it mean to have a Christian education? Is there a distinctiveness about that? And then a classical education. So maybe deal with the issues of Christian and classical as they relate to education.
Absolutely, and there certainly is a distinctive. A Christian education is not algebra, history, English, taught exactly like the public school, and once a week you go to chapel. That's not Christian education.
Right.
Christian education is not, we're going to do math, but instead of apples and oranges, we're going to talk about disciples and prophets.
There you go.
No, that's not Christian education either. Christian understanding understands all of education as having originated from, continually being centered in, and for the purpose of Jesus Christ. So, if you look at the Gospels, right, especially in John, right, in him everything was created, right, nothing has been created, was created without him. All right. You look at Jesus' own statement, I am the truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the truth. All right. So, if that is true, then, if Indianapolis is the capital of Indiana, then that truth is somehow rooted in the person of Jesus Christ. If 2 + 2 = 4, then that truth is rooted in the person of Jesus Christ. Laws of supply and demand, quantum physics, scansion of poetry, anything that is true is somehow rooted in the person of Jesus Christ. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, I don't know how that is exactly. I don't know how that is, but I know that it is. And so a Christian education is going to approach everything from that perspective. That's going to be, it's going to be part of the warp and woof, right? It's
There you
going to be
go.
It's going to be woven right in to what you're doing. And to me, that is the fullest. Right, that's the most well-rounded form of education from a Christian perspective. It would have to have that. Otherwise, you've left out a significant piece. And then on the flip side of that, because it's Christian, it takes in everything. I think some folks may say, well, a Christian education means you're sitting around learning the Bible and how to be nice to people, but you're never going to learn about science. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense.
Right.
You're going to learn about everything. In fact, there is nothing that should be ruled off the table in a Christian education. Now, developmentally appropriate levels, right? Certain things we're not going to talk about with young children. But ultimately, everything. The good, the bad, the ugly, the true, the false, everything is fair game to be discussed in Christian education. So therefore it is, as I say, the fullest, the most well-rounded form. Classical, we typically think of classical as centering somehow in the languages and cultures of Greece and Rome, ancient Greece and Rome. So the Greek language, Latin language, those authors form really the core of a classical education. And then we're going to move from Scripture to one of the Die Hard movies, if that's okay. But you remember in the first Die Hard movie, the main bad guy, Hans Gruber, he sees this model and he looks at it and he says, and Alexander wept, for there were no more worlds to conquer. And he pauses and says, the benefits of a classical education. Right? So it's the notion of the classical world history, poetry, philosophy, culture, and languages of ancient Greece and Rome. So that's kind of the core of it. But then I argue that because you're teaching not just a language, that those really then broaden and take in everything else. So I tell my students, my first-year students, when they don't know me at all, first day of school, don't know me from Adam, don't know whether I'm joking or not, and I tell them, I said, by the way, I said, you need to go down to your counselors and drop all your other classes. They look up, what? I said, no, I'm serious. You need to go and drop all your other classes. I said, just take Latin. I said, because we're going to talk about everything in here. Right? We're going to have a little bit of music, we're going to have some history, there's going to be some science, there's going to be some math, there's going to be some English. I said, take this one class. I said, we got you covered. I said, you go home for the day. Right? Then later in the year, I'll come back to that, and I'll say, hey, remember when I told you could drop all your other classes? Was I right? And I'm like, hey, yeah, we have talked about all those other things in here. Because I think a classical education, obviously we're not going to be getting into the equations of quantum physics in a Latin class, but it doesn't mean we won't touch on it in some fashion, right? Because you're talking about a world, so it's the classical world then. So yeah, you've got those things that are core to a classical education, but then that becomes then the framework for really then discussing almost anything else.
Right. So when we talk about the classical Christian concepts of education, we're really talking about a wholeness. The Hebrew concept of shalom is wholeness. And so when we're talking about this, we're talking about all things under the lordship of Christ. We're talking about Colossians 2:3. From him is the storehouse of wisdom. So from Jesus comes the storehouse of wisdom. All of these things then have not only their origin, but their sustenance from this. Now, let's take this to a different level and tell people just for a moment about what you do outside of teaching. You're also on the board of a different kind of school. So tell us why you do that, why you're invested in a different kind of school, and just take that from there. If you want to talk about similarities, differences, however you want to go, but talk about that different kind of school, what that means to you.
The simple thing is I love education. And there are different models of education out there. And I'm not a person who salutes only one flag. And I do find a lot of folks in education and in society that will really swear allegiance only to one model of education. It's like your sports team. You root for that team, and that's it. Well, I'm fine with that when it comes to basketball because go IU. Okay, let's be sure we get that in there. But when it comes to education, I think there are simply different models. The default model in the United States, and I've said this many times, like the default model until someone conquers us or Christ returns is going to be public education. Free public education, not free, but supported by the taxpayers. That's going to be the default model of education in our country. It's going to last. It's there. But there are other models. There's homeschooling. There's full-on private. There are tutelage programs or kind of hybrid between homeschool and private. And one of the things that folks are finding is different strokes for different folks. And I know that bothers some people, especially in my area of public education. They say, well, wait a minute, anytime you advocate for something else, you're taking tax dollars away from public school. And I'll just come back to what I said before. No, public school will be the default model of education in this country for as long as this country exists. I'm not worried about that being the primary model. However, there are other models that are good. So take our family, for example. My wife's an extraordinary teacher. She's a classics teacher as well. She crossed over to the dark side of the force and got her degree in administration, and was an administrator for a number of years. So she's got that aspect. But she's a phenomenal educator. So when it came time to educate our own children, one of the questions we had was, what do we do with them, right? Where do we send them? What do we do? Well, as we were just saying, we wanted them to have a Christian education because we wanted them to have the whole story, not because we wanted to protect them from some mythical big bad public school, but rather we wanted them to have the entire story. We wanted to have a complete education and not a truncated one. We were fortunate enough, the fact that my wife's able to do that. Not every family can do that. My wife's a phenomenal teacher, so she was able to do some home teaching. But then she quickly found out, or we found, a group called the Masters Study. And this is it's not a co-op, but it's a classical Christian homeschool tutelage. And again, it's a mouthful. But basically it's a school that meets 2 days a week in a local church and partners with homeschooling families. So there's this real synthesis, if you will, kind of a symbiosis between the master study and what's going on in the home. Well, I'm on the board of the master study. Prior to that, my wife and I had actually started a classical Christian full-on private school here in Indianapolis. Then that merged with another classical Christian school, and I was on the board of that. I'm intensely interested in education, and so I want to be able to serve in different capacities. So like I say, I don't know that there's one model that trumps all. Homeschooling is not going to work for everybody, for a lot of reasons. There's not a parent at home to do it. There may be a parent at home who simply doesn't have the disposition for it or the interest in it. Right. Full-on private might be a great option for some people, but it's not going to work for everyone. And maybe it's cost, or maybe it's distance. Public is a great option. I mean, you look at North Central. I mean, we have 7 languages. How many bands? How many orchestras? How many sports teams? You're not going to have that at a homeschool tutelage, or maybe some private schools. So there are advantages. There are pros and cons. And I think that's the thing we've got to recognize. Look, there are pros and cons everywhere. Someone will come out and say, well, we'll lift up one particular school or one particular type of school and try to say, well, looking at one facet of it, this isn't as good as something else. There are pros and cons in everything. What's important is that parents, and this gets back to what we were talking about before with kids coming in, children coming in with the right disposition, it comes with parents taking full responsibility for the education of their children, however they can. If you're working 2 jobs and you're a single parent, there's not a lot you're going to be able to do around the kitchen table.
Right.
Okay? But it doesn't mean that you're not responsible for your child's education and trying to make sure that they have what they need. You're as involved as much as you can be. The only real criticism would be for the parent who willfully ignores or is not as involved as they could
be. No dedication in any regard.
Right.
Well, we have about 5 minutes left, and I would really like to just come back around to the issue of the esteem that was given to you by being chosen Teacher of the Year in 2014. I think that's a very powerful statement that is made not only in your life, but in the people that have identified that in you. And what I'd like to do in these last few moments of the program is to ask you, what would you say to teachers to inspire them? We've just all come off the semester, we're now in summer break. Maybe some people have tuned in and they're going, I'm just sitting here, I'm enjoying this conversation, but I know I got to go back in 8 weeks, Talk about the inspiration that's necessary that not only takes you back into the classroom, but how can you inspire some other teachers to pick that back up again in the fall and go again?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark. I think the thing you have to do is find out, why do you love this? If you can't answer that question, get out.
Yeah.
Get out. There are other jobs. We're a land of opportunity. Do something else. If you don't love it, do something else. Didn't say that you have to enjoy every aspect of it, but you have to love it. You have to love the kids, and you have to love what it is you're teaching. If that's first grade, if it's 10th grade English, if it's senior calculus, you have to love what you're teaching. You have to love the kids. And try to ignore the nonsense. Try to ignore the nonsense.
There was a long vocal pause there.
There's a long vocal pause. The nonsense comes, obviously, from the legislative level. As I've said many, many times, even that doesn't affect teachers as much as nonsense at the local and the district and building level. And sometimes, if you're blessed with a good leader, principal, superintendent, that can make a world of difference.
Yes.
And boy, if not, that can be very, very tough to work in. Nonetheless, when you shut your door of your classroom, do you love what you're doing? Do you love your kids? And if you do, then that's what it's about. And the other thing is, I would say also, don't find all your meaning in teaching. It's a career, but it is also a job. It's not your identity. Your identity is something. Now, I'll never be separated from Magister Perkins, right? Magister is the Latin word for teacher. So people know me, Magister Perkins, and I get that. But ultimately, and I have to remind myself of that, but that's not who I am. I've got my identity somewhere else. And where I draw life really can't just be from my job. And that's true if you're an account exec or a car mechanic. It's got to be from your family, from your faith, and make sure you're rejuvenating and renewing those batteries this summer in those ways.
Rejuvenation process is huge for teachers. I'm thinking about my wife, Robin, who's just come off a long year. We just took a little R&R here this last week, went away for a bit. But that's what she talks about, the issue of rejuvenation. What is it that rejuvenates you? What are the things that you do, that you read, that you invest some time in this summer? What do you do?
Oh, my gosh, do we have another hour? I'm reading 3 or 4 books right now. One nonfiction book by Rod Dreher, The Benedict Option. Very, very good stuff. Rereading a book I've read twice before. It's a novel set in the 17th century England about one of my favorite poets, Alexander Pope, The Scandal of the Season by Sophie G. I'm reading an absolutely ridiculous, stupid golf novel, which again I've read a couple of times before, but it's absolutely dumb, but I want to read it again. It's just pure fluff. By Troon McAllister, called The Foursome. Then I'm reading, I forget, like 6th or 7th in the series of novels about pre-Arthurian Britain, wonderfully written by a guy named Jack White. So reading a bunch of stuff there. And then obviously, in my case, being with our kids. Our son just got a penny board 2 days ago. Didn't know what the heck that was. It's a smaller version of a skateboard, but it's like a long board, but like, what? And so now I tried to get on this. I got on this thing yesterday, promptly fell off. But watching him, he's 16, watching him on his penny board, watching our daughter with her rabbit named Louie, and going biking through our community with our whole family, that's the stuff that really rejuvenates me.
That's really great. Well, we have come to the end of our time here today, and we are just thrilled to have had the opportunity to spend some moments with you today, Steve. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So next week, HB, we are going to listen again to the Comenius students who were here a few weeks ago in a couple of hours. I'm going to be spending 3 weeks actually off the radio show, so we're going to be re-listening to the Comenius students next week, and then the week after, Jim Striedelmeyer and guests will be in from 10th Street down at Neighborhood Fellowship. And then, of course, Joanna Beatty-Taft will be in 3 weeks, and she'll be bringing some for interns in from Harrison Center for the Arts. It'll be a wonderful time. I'm going back to school again, HB.
I
down
love
at
it.
IUPUI.
Education, it never stops.
There
One
it
last
is.
question for Steve, though.
Yes, sir.
Your favorite teacher and why?
Oh my goodness!
Come on, Teacher of the Year. Come on.
I do have several. No, you know what? I'm going to have to share it. But my two Latin teachers in high school, Miss Alice Rank, who is still living. She's in her 90s. She's up in Michigan, and Marcine Farley, who's still teaching over in Illinois. Those two, both teachers then and as ongoing colleagues, have meant the world.
There you go. You are listening to Warp and Woof Radio. You hear us every Wednesday from 10 until noon at radionext.tv at the Cool Groove site. And we are